The eternal dawn cut through the dark expanse of the timeless void like a blade through water. Captain Anya Rice stood at the helm, staring out into the abyss, her thoughts as fragmented as the endless black beyond the ship's reinforced hull. For months, she and her crew had prepared for this moment, the first human venture into the unknown, a journey to a space where time had no meaning and reality itself could bend and twist. But as the ship ventured further, something began to feel wrong. Anya's fingers hovered over the control panel, her eyes tracking the ship's coordinates. The stars were distant, flickering like candles in a vast, unfeeling night. Everything was as it should be, yet the air in the command center felt thick with anticipation. Her officers worked in silence, their faces betraying nothing as they monitored the ship's systems. The hum of machinery and the occasional beep of an alert were the only sounds in the room. Suddenly, a low, rhythmic hum pulsed through the ship's communication systems. At first, it was subtle, just a whisper in the background. But as the minutes passed, the sound grew more insistent, more urgent. Anya frowned, leaning closer to the console. The signal was faint, almost as if it were traveling from a distant source, buried deep within the folds of the void. But it wasn't just static, it had a rhythm, an unmistakable pattern. "Captain, we're picking up something." Lieutenant Clark's voice broke through the quiet, tense air. His fingers danced across his terminal as he analyzed the signal. "What do you mean, something?" Anya's voice was calm, but her gut churned with unease. Clark hesitated, his eyes narrowing at the data. "It's a transmission, but not like any we've encountered. It's too structured, almost deliberate. And the frequency, it's unlike anything we've ever seen." A cold shiver ran down Anya's spine. She turned to her communications officer, Ensign Silva, who had been monitoring the deep space frequencies. Silva's expression was grave as she adjusted her console. "I can't trace its origin," Silva said, her voice taut with a mix of confusion and fear. "It's like it's coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. And it's not just static. It's sending some kind of message, but it's encrypted. I can't decode it." Anya stood motionless for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. The signal seemed to pulse, rhythmic, steady, like a heartbeat. It was calling to them. She wasn't sure why, but she could feel it. It was like an invisible hand pulling them deeper into the unknown. "Get me the full signal," she ordered, her voice sharp. "I want to know exactly what we're dealing with here." Silva nodded, her hands flying over the console. Moments later, the signal's transmission appeared on the screen, a series of bursts, coded in an ancient, undecipherable language. But there was one thing that stood out. Amidst the static, a word, clear as day, echoed through the ship's comm system. "Welcome." The single word reverberated in the silence of the command deck, heavy with meaning. The hairs on the back of Anya's neck stood up. She glanced around the room. No one spoke. The crew shared the same sense of foreboding, as if they had crossed an invisible line into something beyond their understanding. Anya didn't need to say anything. They all knew what was coming. She gave a single, decisive command. "Set a course. We're going to find out who, or what, sent that message." As the eternal dawn altered its course, the silence grew thicker, the weight of the void pressing in on them. Unbeknownst to the crew, the journey they had just embarked on would lead them to something far older and more dangerous than they could ever have imagined. The true test of humanity's place in the universe was about to begin, and it was not a test they could afford to fail. As the eternal dawn drifted deeper into the timeless void, the eerie hum of the mysterious signal continued to reverberate through the ship. Each passing hour felt like an eternity. The crew had grown tense, their nerves fraying with every unanswered question and every unexplained flicker of the ship's systems. The vast emptiness around them seemed to be growing, its weight pressing in from all sides, suffocating any sense of normalcy. Captain Anya Rice stood on the observation deck, staring into the blackness, her thoughts as clouded as the view beyond the viewport. The signal was becoming louder, more insistent, as if it was reaching out to them, urging them forward. It didn't make sense. There was no logical explanation for it. No clear reason why they should be receiving such a transmission from this space. They had crossed light years of uncharted territory, with nothing but the faintest indication of life. And now this. Suddenly, a violent shudder ran through the ship. The lights flickered, and the control panels beeped erratically, as if they had been jolted by some unseen force. Anya's hand gripped the edge of the viewport as she steadied herself. The ship groaned, its metallic frame creaking under the stress. She quickly activated her communicator. "This is Reyes," she said, her voice steady but with a trace of urgency. "Report." "Captain, we've encountered something," came the voice of Lieutenant Clark. He sounded tense, his words clipped. "There's something out there. A rift. A massive tear in the fabric of space. It's pulling us in." Anya's pulse quickened. A rift. She glanced over at Silva, who was monitoring the ship's systems from her station. Silva looked up from her console, her face pale. "It's not just a rift, Captain," Silva said, her voice strained. It's something else. We're being pulled toward it. The gravitational pull is intensifying. The ship can't maintain its course." "Helm, adjust course immediately," Anya ordered, turning to the bridge crew. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers." But it was too late. The Eternal Dawn lurched violently, and the entire ship seemed to shudder under the immense gravitational force of the rift. Anya's vision blurred as she was thrown from her feet, struggling to hold onto her console. The ship's alarms blared, warning of imminent collapse. In the chaos, the ship's trajectory spiraled toward the heart of the rift. "Braced for impact," Anya shouted, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew it was futile. The rift had them in its grip. The world around her seemed to warp. Time and space folded like paper, creating a disorienting blur of past, present, and future. A sharp pain shot through her head. And for a moment, Anya felt herself slipping into darkness. The ship groaned again, louder this time, its hull straining against the force of the rift. The crew was thrown into a dizzying array of flashes. Images of Earth's future, memories of past failures, and strange, distorted versions of themselves. In one moment, Anya saw herself leading a thriving human colony on a distant world. In the next, she saw the Eternal Dawn destroyed, scattered across the void. "Captain, we're..." Lieutenant Clark's voice was cut off, replaced by static. His image flickered in and out of view on the screen. Then, the rift spat them out. The ship lurched again, this time with a deafening crash, as the Eternal Dawn was thrust through the rift's edge and into something far worse. The vessel was suddenly suspended in a void so deep and silent it felt like the very fabric of reality had been ripped apart. Nothing made sense. The stars were gone, replaced by a swirling, dark mist that seemed to shift and pulse with an unnatural energy. "We're in the void," Silva whispered, her voice barely audible. Anya stumbled to her feet, her head still spinning from the disorienting experience. The crew was silent, their faces pale with fear and confusion. No one spoke for several moments, until the communication console crackled to life again. The signal. It was back. Louder now. Clearer. And the message was different this time. "Welcome to the edge." The words echoed in the stillness of the void, sending a cold shiver through the crew. Anya's heart skipped a beat. The presence that had been calling them had brought them here, to the very edge of reality itself. The edge of eternity. The Eternal Dawn drifted motionless in the swirling void, a ship adrift in a sea of nothingness. The gravitational pull of the rift had ceased, but the disorienting effects of the void remained. The ship's systems were barely functional, flickering in and out of life. The crew stood at their stations, staring at their monitors, which now displayed only cryptic readings and static. Silence hung heavy in the air, punctuated only by the soft hum of failing systems. Anya stood before the viewport, trying to make sense of their situation. The vast emptiness outside seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions, and yet there was something more there, an oppressive presence that she couldn't shake. It was as though the very fabric of existence had thinned, allowing something to peer through from the other side. A sudden, sharp beep from the console behind her broke the silence. It was Clark, his voice tense. "Captain, we're not alone." Anya turned, her gaze narrowing. "What do you mean?" "Something's approaching us," Clark said, eyes glued to his monitor. "It doesn't show up on any of our sensors, but I'm detecting a pattern. It's moving toward us, and I'm not sure how to describe it. It's like the space around us is bending, warping in response to it." Anya's pulse quickened. "How long until it reaches us?" 10 minutes. "Maybe less," Clark replied. "Get everyone to their stations. Prepare for whatever's coming." Anya's command was firm, though her heart raced with uncertainty. She didn't know what was out there, but the feeling of being watched had only intensified. Within minutes, the crew was at their posts, bracing for whatever might be approaching. Silva, her voice strained, spoke up from her station. "Captain, there's something else. I'm picking up another signal, similar to the one we heard before. But this one, it's not human. It's..." The words were cut off by a deafening, guttural sound, a low, pulsating hum that seemed to shake the very walls of the eternal dawn. It was coming from outside the ship, growing louder with each passing second. Anya instinctively stepped back from the viewport as the sound intensified, rattling the ship's structure. The hum stopped abruptly, and a voice, ancient and powerful, filled the ship's comm system, reverberating through the walls. It was not human, but its cadence was strangely familiar, as if it were speaking directly into their minds. "You are far from home," the voice said, the words echoing in their skulls. "You have trespassed upon the edge of eternity. We have been waiting." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Anya clenched her fists, steeling herself. "Who are you?" she demanded. "What do you want with us?" The voice responded, its tone calm but filled with an undeniable weight. "We are the Xiathrians. We have existed before the stars burned bright, and will endure long after they fade. And we have watched you. You, who would dare to seek the heart of time, to breach the boundaries of what should remain untouched." Silence fell over the command deck as the crew absorbed the weight of the revelation. The Xiathrians were a name that had surfaced in ancient legends, stories of a race that had transcended time itself, said to be both omnipresent and elusive. Their ships were a mystery to all, but the oldest civilizations, rumored to be capable of manipulating the very fabric of reality. One of the crew, Lieutenant Callahan, spoke up, his voice trembling. Are you responsible for the signal? For bringing us here?" The voice of the Xiathrians resonated again, this time with a hint of warning. "You misunderstand. We did not bring you here, but we knew you would come. The void is not a place for mortals. It is a place of death. Time does not flow here as it does where you come from. But you have crossed the threshold. Now you must make a choice." Anya stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "What choice?" "Release us," the voice intoned, and this time there was a sense of urgency beneath its calm. "Free us from the prison of time. We will guide you to the knowledge you seek. Time itself will be yours to command. But if you choose not to, you will be lost, and your civilization will fall." The crew stood frozen in place, each person feeling the gravity of the moment. Anya's mind raced. To release the Xiathrians meant gaining control over time, over the very flow of reality. But to risk that kind of power, could humanity truly handle such a gift, or was it a curse disguised as salvation? "Why should we trust you?" Anya demanded. "What do you want with us?" The voice seemed to pause, as though considering her words. When it spoke again, the tone was almost sympathetic. "Because, Captain Rice, you have already made your choice. You are here, and now we will offer you a path forward. a path that leads beyond time itself. Anya's heart pounded. The fate of her crew, and of humanity, was hanging in the balance. The Xiathrians had shown themselves, and now it was clear they were not here to help. They were here to test them, to offer them a choice that no one could truly understand until it was too late. The words of the Xiathrians hung in the air, a heavy weight that seemed to press down on every crew member aboard the Eternal Dawn. Time itself, the very thing that defined their existence, was no longer an immutable force. It was a tool, an entity to be wielded. The power they offered was intoxicating, a promise of godlike control over the universe, and it was becoming impossible to ignore. Captain Anya Rice paced the command deck, the endless void outside the viewport reflecting the turmoil inside her mind. The Xiathrians had made it clear. Release them from their prison, and the secrets of time would be theirs. The crew had felt the temptation, the lure of endless possibility, the promise of immortality and infinite knowledge. But what would it cost them? What would it cost humanity? Captain, Lieutenant Clark spoke up, his voice low. We've been hearing the signal again. It's becoming more compelling. Like it's calling us. It's hard to focus on anything else. Anya's brow furrowed. The pull of the signal had grown stronger since their encounter with the Xiathrians, almost as though the ship itself was responding to the ancient being's call. She glanced over at Silva, whose hands hovered above the controls, her face pale and drawn. The temptation was spreading through the crew like a disease. No one was immune. I'm not immune either, Clark continued, his gaze distant. I feel it too, Captain. The pull. It's hard to think clearly when it's there. It feels like time is bending, shifting. I've been seeing things, alternate versions of myself. Different paths I could take. What if we could change our past? Undo mistakes. Anya's heart sank. She had known something like this would happen. The Xiathrians weren't offering a gift. They were offering a test of character, of willpower, and some of the crew were already faltering. The vision of a better world, a world where regrets could be erased, was too tempting for many to resist. Commander Kai, her right-hand officer, approached, his expression grim. Captain, I've been monitoring the crew's psychological responses. The effects of the rift are more profound than we anticipated. It's not just hallucinations. People are beginning to lose track of time. Some of them aren't even sure if we're still on the Eternal Dawn. Anya swallowed hard, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had to act quickly. She couldn't let the crew fall prey to this. Not now. Not when they were so close to unraveling the truth of what lay beyond the rift. We need to stay focused, she said, her voice firm. The Xiathrians may be offering us power, but that's not why we're here. We didn't come to the void for control. We came to understand. And we need to keep that in mind. Don't let it consume you. But as she spoke, she realized her own resolve was beginning to waver. Even as she tried to rein in the crew's descent into madness, she found herself drawn to the allure of the Xiathrians' offer. Could humanity truly resist the temptation to rewrite history? Could she? The room was silent for a long moment, and Anya could feel the weight of every eye on her. Her crew was torn, some of them already entangled in the Xiathrians' seduction, others holding on to their sanity by the thinnest of threads. The longer they lingered in the void, the more distorted their perceptions of time became. I've been thinking, Commander Kai said suddenly, his voice soft, but with a dangerous undercurrent. What if we could use the Xiathrians' power to ensure humanity's survival? Think of all the potential we have, all the possibilities. Anya's gaze snapped to him. She saw the glimmer in his eyes, the same glint that had been appearing in more and more of the crew. The desire to control, to shape the future at any cost. No, Anya said firmly. We're not here to control time. We're here to learn, to grow. Kay's lips curled into a half-smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. I'm not so sure anymore, Captain. We've come this far. What if we could have everything we've ever dreamed of? The crew was listening now, and Anya's heart raced. The Xiathrians had planted the seed of doubt, and it was growing. She could see it in their faces, in their eyes. The desire to wield the power of time, to take control of their fate and the fate of humanity. Anya's mind whirled, the temptation pulling at her every thought. What would it mean to undo the mistakes of the past, to prevent the wars, the suffering, the loss? What if she could rewrite history, give humanity a fresh start, a perfect future? Her fingers tightened on the edge of the console. But deep down, she knew the truth. Time was not something to be manipulated. It was not a tool for control. It was a force that demanded respect, and if they lost sight of that, they would be lost forever. Focus, Anya shouted, her voice breaking through the haze of temptation. We didn't come here for this. We came for knowledge. Now we stick to the mission. Do not give in. For a moment, the crew seemed to snap back to attention. The haze of the void lifted, just a little, and the tension in the room eased. But Anya knew this was only the beginning. The temptation would only grow stronger, the pull of time itself inexorable. As she turned back to the viewport, she knew that the true test was just beginning. They had crossed the threshold. Now, there was no turning back. The tension on the eternal dawn was palpable. Anya stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the swirling void beyond the viewport, her mind reeling from the choice she had made to resist the Xiathrians' seductive offer. But it wasn't just her mind that was faltering. Even now, she could feel the gravity of their power, pressing against her thoughts, clouding her judgment. The Xiathrians had promised them knowledge beyond comprehension, a chance to transcend time itself, and the temptation to seize that power was growing stronger by the hour. Anya clenched her fists, forcing her focus back to the present. She couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. The crew was starting to fracture, some still clinging to their humanity, while others, like Commander Kai, were becoming obsessed with the possibility of rewriting history, of shaping the future as they saw fit. The line between salvation and destruction was blurring, and Anya had no idea how much longer she could hold the ship together. She turned toward her officers, each of them immersed in their work, their faces pale and drawn from the strain. Lieutenant Clark was staring blankly at his console, his mind clearly far away, while Silva's hands trembled as she tried to maintain control of the ship's failing systems. The Xiathrians' influence was beginning to show, taking root in each of them, and it wouldn't be long before their grip tightened beyond their ability to resist. "We're reaching the core of the rift," Clark suddenly said, his voice distant. "The space around us is shifting. The fabric of time itself is unraveling. Captain, we don't have much time." Anya's pulse quickened. She moved toward the control panel, glancing at the sensors. Clark was right. The rift was more unstable than they had realized. Its center was a maelstrom of chaotic energy, a place where the laws of reality seemed to have no power. They were approaching a boundary, one that no human had ever dared to cross before. But the Xiathrians had known it was here. They had brought them to this exact point. A voice crackled over the comm system, cold and deliberate, and Anya's blood ran cold. "You are at the precipice now, Captain. Time is slipping through your fingers," the Xiathrian voice said, its tone serene, almost pitying. "The choice remains yours. Let go of your fear. The power of eternity is within your reach. What you seek is already here." Anya's teeth ground together. The voice was like a whisper in her mind, an invitation she could not ignore. She turned to Commander Kai, whose face was now filled with a fervent hunger, his eyes gleaming with the allure of the Xiathrians' promise. "Captain," Kai said, his voice strained, "we don't have to wait for this power. It's right here, right in front of us. You feel it, don't you? The possibility of rewriting history, of securing our future, of creating a world where humanity thrives without the mistakes of the past. We can't let this slip away. You have to see it. This is the only way. Anya's mind screamed in protest, but the truth was undeniable. She did feel it. The pressure, the allure of the power that could change everything. But that was the danger. The Xiathrians had already warned them. This was a test, and if they failed, the price would be far higher than any of them could imagine. "No," she said, her voice a low growl. "I won't let you do this, Kai. I won't let you destroy us all for a dream." But Kai's face twisted with frustration. "You don't understand, Captain. You're afraid of what we could become, afraid of what humanity could accomplish if we had control over time. But this is the chance we've been waiting for. We've crossed into a place where we can make history, not just learn from it. We can reshape the future. We don't have to suffer." The words were like a poison, seeping into Anya's thoughts. For a brief, fleeting moment, she imagined what it would be like to change the course of history, to prevent the wars, the tragedies, the losses. The guilt and shame that had followed her own decisions began to creep in, as if the weight of the universe itself had been laid upon her shoulders. Could she make it all better? Could she finally fix everything? Her thoughts were interrupted by Silva's urgent voice. "Captain, we've lost control of the ship. It's happening too quickly. The rift's influence is spreading. There's no stabilizing it. We have to make a decision. Now." Anya's heart raced as she moved toward the helm, her mind spinning. They were at the heart of the void now, and there was no escaping the consequences of the path they had chosen. The ship was slipping beyond their control, and every second that passed, the rift's power was eroding the fabric of time itself. Whatever they did now, there would be no going back. She turned to her crew, her voice shaking with the weight of her responsibility. "We are not going to give in to this temptation. We came here for knowledge, not for power. We will not let the Xiathrians control us. We will find another way." The Xiathrian voice echoed one last time, its tone now laced with menace. "Then you have chosen, Captain. Know this, there is a price for all knowledge, and you are about to pay it." Suddenly, the eternal dawn lurched, throwing the crew off their feet. The walls groaned, and an explosion of energy erupted from the center of the rift, engulfing the ship in an infernal light. Time seemed to fracture. Anya could feel it, like the world was shattering around her. Reality itself seemed to bend, twist, and tear, and the eternal dawn was caught in its wake. As everything went black, Anya understood. They had crossed a line. The price of knowledge had just begun. The eternal dawn groaned in protest as the rift's chaotic energy surged through its hull, causing the entire ship to shudder. Anya's world twisted, as if time itself was unraveling. Her stomach lurched, and for a terrifying moment, she could no longer tell where the floor was. The lights flickered, then died, leaving only the eerie glow from the rift to illuminate the command deck. The ship was adrift, suspended in an unstable pocket of reality, trapped between timelines, between moments, and between what was and what could be. Anya struggled to push herself up from the floor, her head spinning, her breath shallow. The crew was equally disoriented, stumbling around the command deck, unable to orient themselves. But it wasn't just the disarray of the ship. There was something else. The air felt thick, charged with a strange, oppressive energy. The hum of the rift was now a constant presence, like a heartbeat reverberating through their very bones. We've crossed over," Silva whispered, her voice trembling. She looked around in horror, eyes wide. "Captain, I don't understand. The ship is still here, but it's not. It's not in real time anymore. We're not in real space. What happened?" Anya's chest tightened as she stared at the flickering console in front of her. There was no clear data, no readout that made sense. They were outside of time, no longer in the past or present, but suspended in some place between. The rift had consumed them, pulling them deeper into a place where the laws of reality no longer applied. "This isn't good," Clark said, his voice strained. His eyes darted around the room, his hands nervously gripping his console. This isn't the rift we came here for. It's something else. Something far worse. We have to get control, Anya said, forcing the words out. Her voice was hoarse, but she tried to keep her tone firm. We need to understand what's happening and find a way to restore the ship. We can't let the Xiathrians win. But even as she spoke, she felt a creeping doubt. The rift had been their mission. They had sought knowledge. But now, that knowledge seemed to be slipping away from them, buried beneath layers of incomprehensible chaos. The rift wasn't just a source of time-bending energy. It was a force that twisted the very nature of reality. Suddenly, the room went silent. A wave of dizziness passed over Anya, and she staggered to her feet. She glanced at her crew, and they were no longer where they had been. The faces of her officers flickered in and out of focus, as if their existence were tethered to alternate timelines, each crew member standing in multiple places at once, disconnected from the present. And then, as if some invisible hand had reached into the heart of the ship, a flash of light filled the room. It was blinding, and for an agonizing moment, Anya thought the ship was being torn apart. She gasped for breath, her hands clutching at her head, as an overwhelming surge of memories, none of them her own, assaulted her mind. Visions of countless futures, lives she had never lived, decisions she had never made, all flashed before her eyes in rapid succession. She saw Earth in flames, its cities reduced to rubble. She saw a world where humanity had conquered the stars, where their empire spanned galaxies. She saw the crew of the Eternal Dawn, not as they were now, but as they had been, and as they could be, in 1,000 different realities. Some of her officers were allies, others were enemies. Some of them were dead. And standing at the center of it all was the Xiathrian presence, a shape that was not a shape, a being that defied all sense of time and space, its voice like 1,000 whispers all at once. "You have opened the door," the voice said, but it was not just a voice. It was an overwhelming flood of thoughts and emotions, all at once. It was everywhere, within Anya's mind, around her, in the very fabric of her being. "This is the price of your choice. You sought knowledge, and now you will understand its cost." Nia tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. The visions continued, overwhelming in their intensity. The rift was not just a portal to the unknown. It was a nexus, a place where every possibility, every potential reality, collided and converged. The Eternal Dawn was trapped within that convergence, and with it, the crew was now part of every possibility that could ever exist. But there was one truth beneath it all. The Xiathrians were not offering knowledge to the crew. They were offering control. Control over time, over the past, present, and future. But at what cost? The deeper Anya looked into the rift, the more she realized that time itself was a fragile, malleable thing, and every choice they made would fracture reality further. As the visions subsided, Anya collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The room returned to focus, but the weight of what they had seen, what they had done, lingered like a shadow. The rift still pulsed outside, a swirling mass of light and dark, beckoning them toward the void. "We've crossed a threshold," Anya whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "There's no going back now." The crew, still reeling from the experience, exchanged nervous glances. They knew it too. The choice they had made was irreversible. Whatever lay ahead, they would have to face it together. But the Xiathrians had made it clear. Knowledge had a price, and they were about to learn it the hard way. Anya stared at the swirling rift outside the viewport, her hands clenched tightly at her sides, as if she could will the reality around them to stabilize. The ship groaned again, its systems barely functional. The Eternal Dawn was no longer just a vessel. It had become a part of something much larger, something beyond comprehension. The line between their reality and the rift was now blurred, like the tattered edge of a fabric pulled too thin. She had no answers. She only had questions, and every passing moment seemed to peel back another layer of truth that they were never meant to see. The Xiathrians had been right. Knowledge had a price. The deeper they went into the rift, the more the very fabric of reality stretched and warped. The crew was fragmented now, both physically and mentally. They were slipping between timelines, versions of themselves splitting off in different directions, all existing simultaneously yet unable to touch one another. And they weren't alone. Anya could feel their presence all around them. The Xiathrians weren't just watching. They were waiting. They knew what the crew had done, what they had sought. And now, with the rift unraveling, they were watching them drown in the consequences of that choice. "Captain," Silva's voice broke through the silence, her eyes wide with fear. "The readings. Nothing makes sense. We're shifting. There's no consistency. The systems are failing, and I'm picking up multiple versions of the ship in different spaces. Some are intact, others are destroyed." Anya's heart skipped a beat. Multiple versions. It couldn't be. Yet she could see it in Silva's eyes. The rift wasn't just distorting time. It was bleeding their reality into others, pulling versions of the eternal dawn from alternate timelines into their own. She couldn't even be sure if they were in the same space anymore. "Clark," Anya called, her voice sharp. "What's the status of our navigation systems?" Clark's hands moved rapidly over the damaged console, but there was no immediate answer. His face was pale, his eyes wide with the kind of terror Anya had never seen in him. He was frozen, as though caught in the grip of some unimaginable force. "Clark," she repeated, stepping forward. "Talk to me." "Captain," Clark said, his voice barely above a whisper. I can see it now. The timelines. They're folding into each other. The eternal dawn is splitting. I can see every version of us, every possible version of our ship, of our mission. Some of them are dead. Some of them are succeeding. But they're all us." Anya's pulse quickened. She could see the strain in Clark's eyes, the way his mind was being stretched to its breaking point. He was seeing too much, too many possibilities at once. The weight of it was crushing him. "We can't stay here," Anya said, her voice firm, trying to ground herself in the midst of the chaos. "We need to stabilize the ship. We need to find a way to disconnect from the rift, before we completely unravel." Kai, who had been standing silent at the edge of the room, stepped forward. His expression was not one of fear, but of cold certainty. The transformation in him had been subtle, but it was undeniable now. The pull of the rift had twisted him into something else. Anya could see it in his eyes. He no longer cared about saving the crew, about restoring the ship. He had embraced the chaos. "We can't disconnect," Kai said, his voice oddly calm. "We've already crossed the threshold. This isn't something we can undo. There's no way out, Captain. You should know that by now." Anya's eyes narrowed. She could feel the shift in Kai, the subtle but unmistakable change. He had been one of the first to succumb to the temptation of the Xiathrians' offer, and now it was clear that he had accepted his fate. He had accepted this. The rift's influence had taken root deep inside him. "We're not giving up," Anya shot back, her voice fierce, her determination growing with each passing moment. "You may have accepted this as your end, but I will not. Not while there's still a chance." But Kai only smiled, the smile of someone who had seen beyond the boundaries of time. "You think you can still change it. You think you can make a difference. The future is already set, Captain. We're all just fragments, drifting through timelines we can't control. The rift is a doorway, but once you open it, you can't close it again. This is the price of knowledge." Anya felt a cold shiver run down her spine as his words hit their mark. Could he be right? Had they already passed the point of no return? Was it too late for them to undo the damage they had caused? Before she could respond, the ship lurched again, a violent tremor that threw her against the control panel. She gasped, struggling to steady herself. Outside the viewport, the rift's energy was intensifying, crackling and surging like a violent storm. The timelines were colliding, converging, and the eternal dawn was caught in the eye of the storm. In that moment, Anya realized the truth. They had crossed a line. The universe itself was bending around them, and no matter what they did now, they were already part of something much larger than themselves. "We need to make a choice," Anya said, her voice hoarse. "We either face this together, or we become part of the rift. We can't let it consume us." The room fell silent as the crew exchanged uncertain glances. There was no turning back now. The rift was tearing at their minds, their bodies, and their very existence. Whatever came next, they would face it together, or not at all. The eternal dawn trembled as the rift surged, reality itself warping and folding in on itself. Time had fractured, and with it, so had their fate. Anya could feel it, possibilities slipping through her fingers, lives she had never lived intertwining with her own. 1,000 versions of herself screamed through the void, each facing the different outcome. Some had already died. Some had surrendered. But one thing was clear. Only one version of them would make it out. She refused to let it be anyone but them. "We still have a choice," she said, forcing herself to stand even as the ship lurched violently. "We can still break free." Kai shook his head, his expression serene, almost pitying. "You don't understand, Captain. We are free. We're part of something bigger now. We've transcended the limits of what we once were. Why fight it?" Anya clenched her fists. "Because this isn't freedom. This is oblivion. We weren't meant to be scattered across infinite realities. We're humans. We exist in one place, one time." She turned to her crew, her voice steady. "We are not letting the Xiathrians decide our fate." Silva, Clark, and the rest of the crew locked eyes with her. Their fear was still there, but so was their resolve. They were human, and that meant something. "Clark, can you force a collapse?" she asked. Clark's fingers flew across the damaged console, sweat beading on his brow. "The rift's tearing itself apart. If we overload our engines and channel it through our core, we might create a localized disruption. It could slingshot us out, or rip us apart." Silva muttered. "We don't have a choice," Anya said. "Do it." As Clark worked, the ship's alarms blared, warning of imminent catastrophic failure. The eternal dawn was barely holding together. Kai took a step toward her. "Anya, please, you don't have to fight it. We can become more. We can." She leveled her pistol at him. "You're not one of us anymore." Kai's eyes darkened. "You'll regret this." But before he could act, Silva stunned him with a quick shot. His body crumpled, and Anya turned away. There was no time for grief. "Engaging overload," Clark shouted. The ship shuddered as its core pulsed with unstable energy. The rift responded violently, spiraling inward, dragging them with it. Anya gripped the console as a deafening roar filled the ship. For a moment, everything collapsed: space, time, identity. And then, silence. Anya gasped as she slammed into the deck. The ship was motionless. The rift was gone. Through the viewport, stars stretched out in a familiar black void. Clark let out a ragged breath. "We're back." Anya looked at her crew. Bruised, battered, but alive. They had defied eternity, and humanity had won.